I need you to understand what just happened in the last 72 hours because almost nobody in American media is connecting these dots. And this story is about to change everything you think you know about North American trade. While Trump stood in front of Congress Tuesday night declaring victory in the trade war, his chief negotiator just told Canada to accept permanent tariffs written into any new deal or there is no deal. And at that exact moment, the Canadian Prime Minister was boarding a plane flying in the opposite direction. Mumbai, New Delhi, Sydney, Canberra, Tokyo, 10 days, 3 continents, 2 billion people. And Washington just realized they might have miscalculated badly. This is Wednesday, February 26, 2026. And what I'm about to show you is the most significant economic countermove any American ally has mounted in decades. Let me show you why this matters. 5 days ago, the Supreme Court struck down Trump's main tariff authority as unlawful. That's the emergency power he used to impose tariffs on practically everything coming into America. The court said 6-3, you exceeded your authority. Mr. President, that tool is gone. Trump immediately replaced it with something called Section 122 authority, 10% tariff on everything. That's the backup plan. But here's what nobody told you. Section 122 expires in 150 days, late July, unless Congress renews it, and Democrats have openly said they will block any extension. So Trump's leverage has an expiration date. And that date is the exact week the USMCA review formally begins, the week America and Canada were already scheduled to renegotiate the entire North American trade framework. Now watch what happened Tuesday night. Jamieson Greer is America's chief trade negotiator, the guy who will sit across from Canada in the most important trade talks since 1994, hours after Trump's State of the Union speech. Greer sat down with reporters and delivered this. If Canada wants a fresh trade agreement, it must accept permanent tariffs, not temporary, not emergency permanent, written directly into the text of the deal. Let that sink in. The end of tariff-free trade between the United States and Canada, 32 years of zero-duty commerce across the busiest commercial border on the planet, $2.7 billion crossing every single day, and America's top negotiator just said, renewal comes at the cost of capitulation. But here's where it gets complicated. Greer went further. He spelled out precise demands. Open dairy markets, restore American wine and spirits to Canadian shelves, reopen government procurement to U.S. firms, all while Washington keeps a protective tariff barrier on Canadian products embedded inside the renewed pact. Then came the line that should have set off alarms in every boardroom from Detroit to Dallas. He said, rushing didn't happen fast enough. U.S. content didn't happen fast enough. We need stricter rules, strip away the trade speak, and the meaning is plain. The deal Trump himself signed in 2018, the USMCA, the agreement his own team negotiated, the framework he personally called a historic triumph, failed, and the fix isn't repair. The fix is to scrap the core principle of zero tariffs that has shaped continental trade since 1994 and install a permanent toll booth instead. That timing I mentioned earlier, it matters enormously. Greer issued that ultimatum 5 days after the Supreme Court invalidated Trump's main tariff authority, 5 days after the courts told the White House its emergency economic powers had been misused. The backup tool Section 122 expires late July without congressional approval. It vanishes. Democrats have vowed to block any extension. Here's the piece. Mainstream coverage overlooked. Days earlier, Trump posted on social media that the replacement tariff would climb to 15%. The announcement happened, the post went live, but the executive order was never executed. The paperwork was never submitted. The threat floats online. The enforceable mechanism does not exist on paper. And the week that replacement authority lapses, late July, is the exact week the USMCA review formally begins. The week Canada and the United States were already scheduled to renegotiate the entire structure that is the leverage Washington believes it carries into those talks. But wait, it gets worse, because what Washington didn't know is that while Greer was issuing ultimatums on live television, Mark Carney was zipping up a suitcase. This isn't a courtesy visit. This isn't staged for cameras. This ranks as the most significant economic counter move any close American ally has mounted against Washington in decades. And almost no one in the U.S. press has joined the dots that changes right now. As of this morning, the framework of North American trade is being taken apart in real time from opposite ends. At once, from Washington comes a public ultimatum insisting on permanent tariffs, full access to Canadian dairy, tougher rules of origin. Locked into whatever agreement comes next from Ottawa comes a 10-day diplomatic sprint aimed at India, Australia, and Japan that is deliberately constructed to render Washington's ultimatum toothless. Both actions unfolded inside the same 48-hour period. Let me show you what's actually happening. Front one, India Thursday morning. Carney touches down in Mumbai, then heads to New Delhi. Current bilateral trade between Canada and India sits at $30.8 billion per year. Carney's declared objective, formalized at the G20 summit, is to more than double that to $70 billion by 2030 via a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. The bitter irony already being debated by Indian trade observers. India signed a framework deal with Trump only 2 weeks before the Supreme Court ruling New Delhi lowered tariffs and committed to $500 billion in purchases. 14 days later, the legal tool that extracted those concessions was struck down by American courts. Carney lands in New Delhi, carrying an unspoken message: patience outlasts panic. A deal with Canada offers something Trump can no longer guarantee any trading partner anywhere: confidence that what is agreed today will still stand next month. The concrete topics include energy collaboration, uranium supply chains, and artificial intelligence cooperation. But the strategic aim is singular. A comprehensive economic partnership agreement with India carves out a tariff preferential route for Canadian goods into a 1.4 billion person market that demands zero American content and zero American sign-off, that is a direct structural workaround to every rules of origin restriction Washington is pushing. Now here's what nobody's talking about. Front 2, Australia. This stop merits far more scrutiny than it has received. 81% of Australians currently oppose Trump's tariff approach. That figure comes from national polls. Australia's Prime Minister faced a television camera and, responding to Carney's description of a post-American trading system, said 3 words: "I agree with him." Carney will address both houses of Australia's parliament in a joint session, the first Canadian Prime Minister to do so in almost 20 years. In Australia's system, a joint parliamentary address is one of the highest honors a foreign leader can receive. It signals deep strategic alignment. Whatever Carney delivers from that lectern will echo in every capital that trades with both the United States and anyone else. Here is where it darkens. For Washington, Australia dominates critical minerals, rare earths, lithium, the essential inputs for every semiconductor, every missile guidance system, every electric vehicle battery manufactured anywhere. These are not replaceable farm goods. These are strategic bottlenecks for the technologies that will shape the next half-century of economic and military rivalry. Last fall, on the sidelines of the G20, Canada, India, and Australia quietly signed a trilateral technology and innovation partnership focused on critical and emerging technologies, plus supply chain diversification beyond the American orbit. American media barely noticed. Carney is now about to turbocharge that 3-nation arrangement with summit-level meetings in all 3 capitals during one 10-day journey. This is the part that kept me up last night. Front 3, Japan, then Tokyo, $36.4 billion in yearly bilateral trade. The cornerstone of the entire Indo-Pacific security structure, every agreement signed in Tokyo reinforces a framework that does not need American scaffolding to hold clean energy, advanced manufacturing, critical minerals, food security. Each deal pulls another strand from the post-1945 assumption that the only market worth pursuing is the American one. Here's who is paying close attention and what they see. American auto workers watch Trump's trade representative openly suggest the shuttering of a major auto plant in Canada. As evidence, the plan is succeeding. Two-way auto trade between the United States and Canada surpasses $100 billion annually. That flow moves both ways. The country just ordered to swallow permanent tariffs now has 91% of its population demanding reduced reliance on the United States. American farmers watch 40 agricultural groups pull money this week to launch a campaign backing trade agreement renewal. They understand precisely what Greer's permanent tariff demand signifies. If Canada accepts permanent tariffs on its exports, it will mirror them on imports: American corn, soybeans, pork, dairy. All of it gets repriced in a market that takes roughly 1/3 of U.S. agricultural exports, and Carney is preparing to spend 4 days in India exploring agricultural partnerships that could redirect Canadian food exports into a market 7 times larger than Canada's home consumption. But that's not even the real story. American defense contractors watch the Canadian Defense Minister board. The same aircraft defense cooperation sits on the agenda in New Delhi, Canberra, and Tokyo. 3 of the biggest defense spenders in the Indo-Pacific. Carney has already shifted 70% of Canadian military procurement away from American suppliers and locked Canada into the European Union's defense procurement framework. Every new defense tie formed on this trip is revenue that will never show up on a Lockheed Martin earnings report. International capital sees something simpler. America's top trade negotiator publicly declared the era of free trade with its closest ally is finished. That closest ally responded by boarding a plane, headed the opposite direction. That message needs no interpreter. Reports are coming in that the atmosphere inside the White House is growing increasingly tense. Trump spent 108 minutes addressing Congress, insisting tariffs are succeeding. America is prevailing, the world is complying. He said it 5 days after the Supreme Court ruled his primary tool unlawful. He said it while the replacement authority counts down to expiration. He said it while the executive order he announced online was never formalized. This does not look like leverage. When reporters asked Greer when he anticipates a deal with Canada, his reply was 2 words. We'll see. That is not the response of someone holding strong cards. That is the response of someone who publicly demanded permanent tariffs from a country whose prime minister is currently scheduling meetings across 4 continents with leaders who command 2 billion consumers, and the raw materials every major technology America will rely on for the next 50 years will require. Meanwhile, Canadian markets are sending a signal. Washington appears unwilling to register. The TSX Composite Index reached 34,000 for the first time ever. Major Canadian banks exceeded quarterly profit forecasts, while American markets fell 500 points in one session on a Trump social media post last Friday. Canadian markets have been steadily rising. That gap is not random. It is the market betting on 2 separate futures. Here is the domino chain already moving, and why Washington cannot halt it. Canadian companies have already replaced nearly 11 billion of the 18.5 billion in American export revenue they lost by pivoting to 27 other trading partners. That figure comes from actual trade statistics. Not government-spin businesses are not waiting for the USMCA review. They are already constructing the alternative. And then this happened. If Carney formally signs a comprehensive economic partnership agreement in New Delhi this week, Canada will have secured strategic trade relationships with the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th largest economies on Earth, China, the European Union, India, and Japan in less than 12 months. That is not diversification, that is a new gravitational center. If the Australian parliamentary address yields joint declarations on critical minerals or defense cooperation that pointedly omit American involvement, the message becomes impossible for Washington to dismiss. And when Carney enters the USMCA review talks in late July, he will arrive carrying partnerships representing more than half of global GDP. The person opposite him will hold a demand for permanent tariffs and a legal instrument that expires the same month. You cannot credibly threaten to destroy someone's only crossing when they have been building ferries for a year. Now, let me show you something. Greer's pointed warning about so-called screwdriver operations countries such as Vietnam or China shipping goods to Canada for token processing before sending them duty-free into the United States was not a casual aside. It was a deliberate signal. What he outlined is the rationale for rewriting USMCA rules of origin so severely that Canada shifts from being a gateway to becoming a choke point. Let's get precise, because this is where the genuine risk hides. Under existing USMCA rules, goods produced in Canada with substantial Canadian content cross into the US tariff-free. That is the backbone of integrated North American supply chains, auto parts, agriculture, energy. They move freely because the rules permit it. What Washington now wants is to demand sufficient American content inside those same goods before they qualify for 0 tariffs, even in a renewed deal. Every supply chain touching Canadian territory would face inspection, not only for Canadian content, but for American content. The consequence is intentional and severe. Canada already maintains a trade agreement with the European Union. Canada belongs to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada has standing arrangements with Japan, South Korea, and 11 other countries. Under the origin rules, Washington seeks none of those partnerships could be used to funnel goods through Canada into the American market. Every global trade link Canada possesses would turn into a liability inside the bilateral relationship that is the snare Washington is attempting to erect a wall, not merely around its own market, but around Canada's access to everyone else's market at the same time, and Carney has just walked straight past it. Here's what I'm missing. So, what comes next here is where paths split. Scenario 1, Washington retreats. Greer's permanent tariff position was an aggressive opening bid if the economic signals keep diverging. Canadian markets climbing, American farm exporters herding Republican senators from agricultural states will start breaking ranks. 40 farm organizations are already playing that hand. A deal gets reached closer to 2018 terms with superficial changes. Both sides claim success. The trade war fades quietly. That's the optimistic scenario, but I don't think that's what happens. Scenario 2. Carney's sprint exceeds expectations. The India SEPA launches formally. Australia issues joint critical mineral statements. Tokyo produces clean energy and defense cooperation agreements. By the time the USMCA review begins, Canada's structural dependence on the American market has shrunk. Washington's leverage weakens with every signature. The permanent tariff demand becomes unenforceable against a country with real alternatives. Documents reveal that Canadian officials have been preparing for this exact scenario for months. The India trip isn't improvisation. It's the execution of a strategy that began the moment Trump won the election. Scenario 3, mutual miscalculation. Washington dismisses Carney's travel as optics and presses the permanent tariff demand into formal talks. Canada counters with reciprocal tariffs on American agriculture and consumer goods. American farmers take the hit. American auto supply chains fracture. Both economies shrink at once. The relationship constructed over 32 years takes a decade to restore. And here's what scares me about scenario 3. It's not impossible. Trump has a pattern of doubling down when challenged. His team believes tariffs are working even as the Supreme Court strikes them down, even as replacement authority expires, even as allies pivot away. The clock that matters right now is this. Sources are now confirming face-to-face talks with Canada will start in a couple of weeks. By then, Carney will have returned from New Delhi, Canberra, and Tokyo. The meetings will have occurred. The agreements will have been signed. Or not. The messages will have been delivered. Watch what Carney signs in India. Watch what he says. From Australia's parliamentary floor, watch the USMCA timeline. Those 3 markers will reveal which scenario is active. Let me show you why this goes beyond just trade. American officials are learning the hard way that the post-1945 assumption that allies have nowhere else to turn no longer holds when you tell your closest trading partner to accept permanent submission as the price of friendship. And that partner has spent a year building alternatives. You don't have leverage, you have a bluff. And Carney is about to call it the Supreme Court ruling. Didn't just strip Trump of legal authority, it exposed the entire strategy as temporary. The Section 122 tariffs expire in 5 months. The USMCA review begins in 5 months. Those timelines converge at the worst possible moment for Washington. Here's what the latest information shows. American negotiators are realizing they may have overplayed their hand. Greer's "We'll see" comment wasn't confidence, it was uncertainty. 40 American agricultural groups just launched a campaign to save the USMCA. They represent the farmers who will eat the cost of reciprocal Canadian tariffs. They see what's coming. Republican senators from farm states are quietly telling colleagues they won't vote to extend Section 122 authority past July. Without a Canada deal, the political math is turning against the hardline position, and Carney knows it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Officials are now saying Trump believed the Supreme Court ruling would force Congress to codify his tariffs into permanent law, giving him the leverage he needs for USMCA talks. But in his State of the Union address, Trump said congressional action will not be necessary. He just cut off his own escape route. He can't demand Congress pass permanent tariff legislation if he publicly promised not to ask for it. The negotiating position is collapsing in real time. And every day Carney spends in Asia signing agreements is another day American leverage evaporates. The latest information shows Canadian markets understand this. Canadian bank stocks hit record highs this week. American agricultural futures dropped. The market is pricing in scenario 2. Carney succeeds, Washington backs down, the USMCA gets renewed closer to current terms, and Canada emerges with a diversified trade portfolio that makes it less vulnerable to American pressure forever. What I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. The India CEPA isn't just about trade. It includes defense cooperation technology, transfer critical mineral supply chains. If that deal closes this week, Canada will have locked in alternatives to American partnership across every strategic sector Washington thought it monopolized. Trump stood before Congress and proclaimed, "America is winning 12 hours later." His trade representative told the world the price of friendship with America's closest ally is now permanent submission. 24 hours after that, a former central banker from Ottawa boarded a plane to demonstrate that friendship was never the sole option. The toll booth stands empty because the traffic already discovered another route, and here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit. They didn't see it coming. They thought tariff threats would bring Canada to heel. Instead, Canada is showing the world that middle powers working together can route around American economic coercion, and every country watching is taking notes. I'm curious what you think about this. Does this change how you see the trade war? Am I the only one who thinks Washington just made a massive strategic miscalculation? Let me know in the comments, because over the next 10 days, we're going to find out if America's closest ally just rewrote the rules of economic statecraft.